I'll get your stream going.
I
And
found it
ready.
kind of interesting, his email message that he sent responded to your email.
All right, I got you live back here.
Okay.
Okay. All right, who's all good there? Chase, you doing all right? Hey, what's wrong with you? Ain't no normal. Hello, Chase. How are you?
Hello.
Hello, Donna. How are you?
Good. I wasn't sick. I just had allergy of some kind.
Those allergies do that to you.
I mean, I hardly ever have them. So I really can't complain, but I was coughing like crazy
Oh, no.
and blowing my nose. I mean, I sounded bad. Everybody just, go away. And I would have blamed them. But I'm not contagious. I'm positive of that. Sad we didn't have, there wasn't any class last Wednesday, but at least I didn't miss anything.
No? No, we didn't have any class.
Oh, you know, on our website, they have the classes and what's being taught. They have this class we're on. They have you teaching 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Ron teaching something with nature of man. Then I don't know about all the other ones, but they're, I don't know what they're teaching now, but they have it wrong.
Oh, they haven't changed that, huh? I'll mention that to John then. John mentioned that on our website.
I said, don't throw this bag away, it's got valuable stuff in it.
Texas.
I know you don't like sitting much.
Lots of hours of work.
Oh my, yeah.
It's gonna be sometime in the middle of April.
I didn't see a thing.
What I did was, I gave you three.
We'll make sure I'll tell
Trying to cover a chapter a week, but
If you
that
need more
doesn't
than
always
three,
happen,
then
depending on the
no, I got
questions.
more.
Yeah, yeah, get it.
And then on Wednesday, I just gave you the one. And I figured what we'll do, the last book that I wrote this on, that'll be the one that you will stick in on Sunday, and I'll stick in on Wednesday.
Okay, Donna, he said he'd get that straightened out.
So that way you'll be right, but now we make it, I have to make another that day. So, on this one, there's not much for me to do, but color, I thought you might wanna get some straw. Oh, something maybe. I've got some, if you want to bring it, some thick rubber made kind of stuff. That you can cut out a little basket over there. If you want to do that. Because there's not that much to do on that one. There's a lot more to do on most of them, but.
I got that,
Thank you. You're welcome.
puller in, got it put together, actually got it started, and it works.
Well, good. Working good, huh?
Together or
They're hooked together.
Ooh, I'm still just as dizzy as a hoot owl. I don't understand it. I still must have a crystal loose somewhere.
Something like that, how, like they told you all the exercise you can do to do your neck and all that kind of stuff. 'Cause I know, they told Phyllis Buxton had that.
Yeah.
And told her to go like this and loose the crystals back to where it's supposed
Yeah.
to do. And Tommy did the same thing, it helps.
It showed on the internet. I've been doing this, and it did do something.
Yeah.
Suppose on the internet, lay down on a hard table or a solid bed, and put your head over off of the bed, and do like this, and then turn your head like this,
Yeah.
and hold it for quite a while. And I did that, and I did that. It was like 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and about 3 hours later, I was sitting in the chair, and I was feeling kind of funny, and I went over, I was gonna pick up something off of our coffee table, and I'm telling you, I picked that thing up, and it like my brain was pulling to the right.
Ooh.
It was like it was sucking out of my head, and I'm going, ooh. That was the weirdest.
It would have gone viral.
I mean, I'm not kidding you. It felt like it was just pulling me to that ball, and it's sucking that brain right out of there. It was like, and since then I haven't been as dizzy. But I still think there must be.
I don't have to get up at 1
One
o'clock
more?
in the morning so I can actually come.
Oh, things have changed, huh?
Yeah, my last day at work was, Friday, I don't work there anymore.
Didn't, you haven't changed jobs yet, or
No.
changed where you were working? No?
No, I'm not working at all right now.
Working at all
Yeah,
right now.
they won't let him. His diabetes is too bad.
Because I'm a insulin dependent diabetic,
Okay.
Oklahoma Department of Transportation law says you cannot drive a commercial vehicle if you are on an injectable insulin. So I was told, bye.
You may sit anywhere you want.
All right, I was looking for
We won't
a
let,
Bible and I see one.
we won't let anybody move you. We need some air in here.
Whoa.
I don't have to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Nice to have you, buddy.
It's taken me about a week to adjust my sleep schedule.
Right.
Yeah, the first day I was off, the next morning I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Then it's 4, and then it's 5, so little by little I'm
Right.
trying to get back on a decent sleep schedule.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, how did Lisa Bible class go?
I didn't get to go. That's something
I don't think we met. The name's Idaho.
Gilbert. Nice to meet you, John.
I missed you Sunday, did you say?
I was here this Sunday.
I know, I said I missed you Sunday.
Oh,
What did you-
I was coughing so bad. I was coughing and blowing. I did
Hey,
my allergy.
you
I
know
have a
the
cold,
Wi-Fi
no
password?
Well, I
fever.
never did get to do it.
And I didn't go. I felt fine, but I sounded bad. People were like,
I still do it old school,
Yeah,
Chris.
I never did.
I'm really glad
Asking
to go
if
to
he was
that.
sick or what. Well,
I
one is
prefer old school.
I'll ask.
I don't.
Yeah.
Thank
I was in a hurry
Yes,
to
sir.
read my Bible to
You
just.
said a really good
Right.
job.
Thing I was spent.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
Part
okay.
of the day, right?
You don't work nights, do you?
I could
Get it all out,
find
kinda-
it. You don't need to go.
I think I did that
Everybody's all thinking
Right.
you're sick. I wasn't, I stamped.
Yes.
Well, that, yeah.
So,
Well, it's nice to meet you.
Thank you. Very easy to
I tried to.
I'm so glad it worked out.
I really put your message on the email.
You're gonna teach Sunday school for the kids.
I assure you they'll come.
You are.
As long as
I've
they
never heard
come,
that one.
like you said.
Here's all your stuff. No, my mother
I
did.
need someone to see ya.
We usually do.
That's a wonderful thing. We fly mostly in the eastern
Hey, I
half of
can
the
get a
US.
hold of, I got a
No,
lot
no
of.
matter where it goes.
Crap.
If I get there on time, we schedule, let us
And
email the
Yeah, that's right.
a day or two in advance, someone
So we
will
buy it
find a way to
and we
come
print
pick
on
you
it.
up. It's just a
And what I
wonderful
do
thing.
is all the trimmings I got, and I got all kinds of lots of them, that you could probably like
In the
mix up and you could print on it and make it.
You can print on it,
Go out
cause
when the
she
sun
does
comes
love
up in the morning,
printing.
take an airplane back to Houston and then
I don't know.
and sit there a little bit and then turn around and fly to Canada to take a plane to Toronto.
And I'll tell you, they get every whole one.
We're about to finish Genesis up, and so you're welcome to that if you'd like to have it. That's just kind of the handout I gave to the class with an outline of Genesis. And in that handout, we're on page 114.
114, awesome.
oh, yeah, let's heal him, and we can.
I don't know this Victor Eskew personally.
I know what it is.
He's a preacher
66 Bible books.
at, let's see,
All one.
I forget which
Okay,
congregation he's
yeah.
with and everything, but I got this offline and
All
everything.
right.
And,
We're pretty limited on luggage, so I won't take it with me, but I sure appreciate letting me look at it. during
you're
class.
welcome.
I got it.
There is no Wi-Fi password.
Yes, there is.
Isn't it
66 Bible
66
books.
books or Bible books? Okay.
Oh, yeah, 66 Bible
I knew it
books.
was
I forgot
something,
about
66
that.
books,
Yeah.
66 Bible, I don't know.
I forgot
Okay,
about
there you
that, but
go.
that is true.
I'm occasionally right, occasionally.
Well, occasionally I'm right too. Hello, John.
There's one time I am right.
They used to have them up
Oh, I'm
here at
trying
the
to.
beginning, but they didn't have any of them. And John was talking.
Hey, Pat, I see it.
I'm surprised they didn't know it.
I got everything turned on here,
Oh,
John.
there is one. Well, that's because you're.
I did wait on you. Wasn't that nice of me?
I said I'm glad you waited on me.
Yeah, I did wait on you. That's nice of me.
They started paying him on the back before he breaks his arm, right?
I don't know, I think something's wrong with one of his arms already.
Thank you, Isaac. Now, why was he patting me on the back?
I'm just kind of,
Your statement about, well, I got everything turned on, I was looking out for you.
Oh, well, you know, I just didn't want you to mess it up after I got it set up.
I wouldn't, I look and see if they're on.
Yeah, they are. This one. Here, you want me to fix it for it? Well, I don't think it's on. Maybe.
Okay, my clock says it's time. That clock still says 1 minute, so we're gonna go by my clock. We're in Exodus, I'm sorry, Genesis, the 45th chapter. We're going to begin in that chapter tonight. And try to cover a chapter a week, but sometimes we don't make that. We'll see how far we get tonight. This is a shorter chapter, 28 verses. This is where Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers now. Up to this point, he's been testing them and all of that. and now he's going to reveal himself to his brothers. The first half of chapter 45, verses 1 through 15, actually finishes the thought of chapter 44. The second half, verses 16 through 28, though, belongs with chapter 46. And we had the story of Joseph's reunion with his brothers. It is now complete, and the narrative focus shifts to the reunion of Joseph with Jacob, his father. And so we'll begin to see that tonight as well. I don't know of any of the congregation that are sick, other than the fact some of our members, like Maxine, not able to get out at night, so we want to continue to remember them. You get a chance, you want to meet Gilbert. Gilbert's an airline pilot, and glad to have Gilbert tonight.
Thank you, sir.
And so please don't hesitate to offer your comments on anything we study tonight. So let's begin with a prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the many blessings You've given us. And we thank Thee, Father, for this privilege we have to assemble together to be able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We thank Thee, Father, for each and every member here tonight, for the encouragement that we can bring to each other, and for Your Son who loved us enough to die upon the cross that we might have everlasting life if we'll be faithful to Thee. We thank Thee, Father, for the privilege we have of being able to study Thy Word, and we ask that You would be with each one of us, that we might be able to look into this book of Genesis to have a full understanding of those things You want us to understand, so that we can look forward to that day that Your Son comes again. We ask also, Father, that You be with our members who have physical ailments, that they might be restored to their health, and we ask that You would use us as instruments to reach out and help in any way that we can. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. Okay. Ron has begun a study on the redemption of Christ on Sunday mornings, and he's been talking a little bit about Genesis, and just want to continue to emphasize that what we're looking at here is the lineage going into the birth of Christ and everything. And of course, Joseph plays an important role of that. Judah we'll look at a little bit later. But here Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Now, if you look at your outline, those of you that are looking at it, he gives actually three potential titles. One of them is, and Joseph said, I am Joseph, verse 3. Also, Joseph, my son, is yet alive, verse 28. And he uses Genesis 45, verses 3 and 4 as the key verses for this chapter. It is in these two verses that Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And twice he tells them, I am Joseph. It will also be this message that they must convince their father of when they return to Canaan. Okay? So let's begin. And Isaac, why don't we begin with you tonight, if you'd read verses 1 and 2 for me.
And Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried out, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept out loud. And the Egyptians in the house of the Pharaoh heard it.
Okay, so as I have up there, emotions are powerful forces that often move us into action. The brothers had passed every test that Joseph had put before them at this point, and they were very sorry. I use the word very. We know they were sorry for what they had done to Joseph in a similar situation. They did not do the same to Benjamin, and that was the one thing that Joseph wanted to make sure that did not happen, that his youngest brother had not been sold to slavery like he had been. And they didn't do this even when there was an easy escape for them. Okay? Judah had given proof of their new direction by his offer of self-sacrifice to spare Jacob. All of this culminates in Joseph no longer being able to control his emotions. And so you see here he breaks down in tears. He clears the room for his self-revelation for at least three reasons. The first reason is that this is now purely a family affair. He now knows that these are his brothers. He knew that before, but they're now going to know that he is their brother. So the second reason is a man of his position ought not to show such extreme emotion in front of his subordinates. And remember, from the age of 17 now, he's basically an Egyptian, and he's got all these subordinates here, so he can't show that emotion. And the third reason is clearing the room prevented the airing of such ugly aspects of the relationship of the people of God before unbelievers. Okay? For the past several chapters, the 11 have been referred to as the men. Now, though, in the moment of reconciliation, the writer returns to describing them as his brothers. Again, look at verse 1. It says, Then Joseph restrained himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And then we see the same thing in 3 and 4. Middle part of verse 3, But his brothers could not answer him. Verse 4, I am Joseph, your brother. We can look at verses 15 and 16. Hello, Jensen. Verse 15 says, and after that his brothers talked with him. Verse 16, so now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. And then finally in verse 24, so he sent his brothers away. So now instead of referring to them as men, they're now referred to as brothers. So you see that family relationship. So we see here in verse 2, he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. He had dammed up this stream of tears for a great while now. But now it swelled so high that he could no longer contain himself. He wept aloud, so that those whom he had forbid to see him could not but hear him at this point. These were tears of tenderness, tears of strong affection, and with these he threw off that austerity with which he had hitherto carried himself towards his brethren, for he could bear it no longer. Any comments on verse 2, 1 and 2? All right, look at verses 3 and 4. Ron, you want to read that for me, please?
Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, Please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt.
Okay, in your handout, this is capital letter C on page 114. What we see here is some families will receive news about their family members that is almost beyond belief. And we'll look at Genesis 50, verse 15 here in a minute. But although Joseph has already asked this question, previously he had asked as a stranger making small talk. Now he asked as a son, my father, genuinely concerned with the truth and expecting the kind of account one brother would give to another. Their fear and the disconcerting feeling which overcame them is certainly understandable at this point. They are completely in Joseph's power. A man whom they knew through his Egyptian guys to be a harsh and cruel man, and a man whom as Joseph they had severely wronged. So there was two reasons why they might be a little reluctant here and everything. They had kept their distance because of his position and their fear of him. His revelation had not inspired them to close the gap, so Joseph sought to do so. This request is to be understood as an invitation to begin conversation. They obeyed him, obviously. Joseph would have to win back their confidence at this point because this relationship has been severed for quite some time now, and so now they're going to have to build this relationship back. Let's go to Genesis, the 50th chapter, and I'll read verse 15 here, where it says, When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. Now remember, we're in chapter 45, and here's 5 chapters later, and they still are concerned that Joseph may try to get revenge against them because they have done a great wrong to him. So, but there's no rebuke that is intended here. He needs to prove his identity. Verse 12 says, Genesis 45, verse 12 says, And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So he's trying to prove his identity. Only Joseph knows their secret. Moreover, with their secret out, they can be freed from suppressed guilt. Any comments through verse 4? Yes, John.
I don't think they're really relieved from the suppressed guilt. I think it's making it deeper because now they know somebody can release it at any point they want to.
Well, and that's true. That's why we looked at chapter 50 and verse 15 and everything, because they're still concerned that Joseph may try to get revenge here.
Now, they might be relieved that he's alive, but they ain't relieved from the guilt.
That's true. That's true. All right, let's look at verse 5. Chris, would you like to read that?
Now therefore therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life.
Okay. Now in your handout, this is actually capital letter D. So as I have up here, in the process of reconciliation, kind words should be spoken even by the one who has been wronged. And this is what we're going to see that Joseph is trying to do here. There may be no better summary of providence than found in this verse. Regardless of what man may do, God's plan will always be accomplished. There are two aspects to any event. First, human mishandling, and secondly, the perfect will of God. Joseph not only forgives his brothers, but Joseph also forgets. But he wishes even those who had wronged him to forget the injury that they had done, that they might not suffer distress on the account. And with deep piety or pity, he attributes the whole to the providence of God, for he says in verse 5, God sent me before you to preserve life. So on every word here, a strong emphasis may be laid. It is not you, but God. It is not you that sold me, but God who sent me. Egypt and Canaan must both have perished, had not a merciful provision been made. You were to come down hither, and God sent me before you. Death must have been the consequence of this famine, had not God sent me here to preserve life. And so Joseph is attributing all this to God and not to mankind. Any comments on verse 5? All right. Stephanie, would you like to read verses 6 through 8 for me, please?
For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all of the land of Egypt.
All right, so God's providence provides, and there remains 5 years of famine at this point. Okay? It is now more than 20 years since Joseph was sold into slavery. It is comparable with the length of time for Abraham between promise and fulfillment. Let's go back and look at Genesis 12 and verse 4. Debbie, you want to read that for me, please?
So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran.
All right, so now remember, Abram was 75 years old at this point between the promise and fulfillment. Now look at Genesis 21, verse 5, John.
And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him.
All right, now we're looking at 25 years. Now, and for Jacob in the service of Laban, Genesis 31, verse 41. Gilbert, you want to read that?
Yes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times.
All right, so we looked at 25 years for Abraham. We looked at 20 years for Jacob and his service to Laban. And what I'm saying is this is similar to the 20 years since Joseph was sold into slavery here, okay? So in retrospect, everything is clear. And Joseph seeks to make it clear to them and comfort them with his forgiving words. When he says, God sent me before you. He repeats what he had said in verse 5 then, concerning the hand of God in this business, that by fixing their thoughts upon his providence, they might be less oppressed with the weight of their own guilt. To save your lives by a great deliverance, he says. So he's bringing out this wonderful manner here, that God intended for me to do this. All this took place to save your lives. If it wasn't for me, you would die from this famine. And so he points out that I came to this place, and pitch of honor and power is not to be imputed to your design, which was of another nature, but to God's overruling providence, which ordered the circumstances of your action, so that I should be brought to this place and staked. Look at Genesis 50, verse 20. Florence, you want to read that?
But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive.
So Joseph is pointing out to them that God meant all of this for good. And he's not holding any grudge here. So, a father to Pharaoh to advise him and to provide for him as fathers do for their children, and to have the authority, respect, and power of a father with him. Okay? Any comments through verse 8? Yes, Isaac.
I wonder if they're thinking about those dreams he interpreted by now. You know, they're probably thinking about that big time.
Oh, I'm sure they're, that's probably still in their mind, yeah. So, any other comments? Yes, Donna.
To me, this is a good example of how people say, if someone doesn't ask for forgiveness, you don't have to. He forgave them even long before they said they were sorry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I've always made this comment to myself, is that if someone wrongs you and they don't ask for forgiveness or anything, but you continue to hold it a grudge, who's losing sleep? Them or you?
I mean,
So,
if you're good, you need to forgive them and just get over it.
yeah. So this is what Joseph is doing. He's not going to lose sleep over this. He's forgiven them, and he's hoping that they will let this go past as well, that they would realize that everything has happened for the providence of God. Any other thoughts? Yes, Debbie.
Well, I mean, he didn't just say that this was God that sent him there just for them. It's for him too. I mean, like you could go through that life that he went through and be bittered and angered, but he knew that there was a purpose, and he found the purpose and all that. So I think it helped him too to get through with, through all the things he went through.
Well, there's no doubt Joseph never lost his faith in God. John?
I was just gonna say, I find a lot of scripture that says you should forgive people. I ain't found one that says you have to wait for them to ask.
That's exactly right, yeah. So, exactly right. So, good point. All right, let's look at verses 9 through 11. Donnie, you want to read that for me, please?
Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. Therefore I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you have your household and all that you have would be impoverished.
Okay. So, as I have up there, reconciliation can involve the complete restoration of relationships without any further estrangement. This in your handout is on page 115, is capital letter G and capital letter H. What we see here is Joseph invites the entire family down to live nearby where he can provide for their needs more easily. With 5 more years of famine and a son in charge of the world's food supply, this move is a no-brainer. To Joseph, Jacob is my father and his brothers are your children. There are no references to Goshen in any Egyptian remains. However, if you look at, and I didn't put it up there, but go to Genesis 47 and verse 11. Where it says, and Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Okay? This gives us the name that it bore in later times, the land of Ramesses. Okay? This name, coupled with the fact that the district was fertile, if you go and you look at Genesis 47 and verse 6, where it says, the land of Egypt is before you, have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land, let them dwell in the land of Goshen. Okay, so here we see that name. And if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. So, this name, coupled with the fact that the district was fertile and near to Joseph at court, suggests that it was in the eastern part of the Nile Delta near Tanis. Now, I didn't put a map up of that, and I'm sorry, I should have, but this is very fertile ground. In fact, it was lots of grass for the livestock of Jacob and his sons and their livestock. They were able to grow a lot of produce to be able to sustain their family and everything. And as we will see as we get into the book of Exodus, this was the best land that Egypt had to offer. And yet Joseph was able to convince the Pharaoh to let his father and brothers and their families have that land. Any comments through verse 11? Yes, John?
Joseph was in charge of Egypt on everything except for Pharaoh.
He was, yes.
It wouldn't take much convincing because he was in charge.
He was in charge, but he did have to convince Pharaoh because Pharaoh had some livestock too.
Well, you just had to let him know he was doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you did tell him to say that, hey, you were herdman, that way you could pick them.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah. So, Debbie?
I just find it interesting that he makes the statement, there's gonna be 5 years of more of famine, because to me, that statement's just proving that he has faith in God, because who's telling him that it's gonna be 5 more years?
Right.
Like, he just knows from the dreams and from what has been told him. So I think it's interesting that he says, there's gonna be 5 more years, and there's no doubt, you know, he just makes it boldly, you know.
Well, and you're right, and when you think about it, part of the reason that he, other than the fact that he had complete faith in God, is when he interpreted those dreams, remember what the first 7 years was 7 years of plenty, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was fulfilled. So if that was fulfilled, and the second part of the dream was 7 years of famine, then that just confirmed his faith even more so, that what the dreams came about and his interpretation of those dreams, they were going to be fulfilled. And so he was able to confidently say that there's going to be 5 more years of famine. Yes, Gilbert?
Some of the things that the Bible makes me wonder about, the Bible doesn't answer because it's not part of the Bible story, and I get that. But just while we're on this topic of Joseph with God's providence saving at least his family, saying there's going to be 5 more years of famine, I really wonder how far that stretches. And my point for this would be Genesis 16, when Hagar gives birth to Ishmael. God tells her in verse 12, he'll be a wild man, but he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And back up in verse 10, multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. Well, if she's back up there having a baby roughly the same time Isaac did, Isaac came along, sorry. There's not going to be time for Ishmael's seed to have multiplied into this great number, just like Abraham's seed hasn't multiplied. They're going to be in Egypt 400 years for that to happen.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, I could see God's providence in that also. Joseph might be keeping food in one place in the earth where not only his family is going to come, but his cousins, so to speak, that are living with his family, they probably trekked over and stayed alive by getting some of this food also. You know, it doesn't say that, but just God, he doesn't abandon the rest of the world. So I wonder that Joseph's maybe having more on his shoulders than even we learn about because of other people that God dealt with.
Well, I think you're right. If you go back to the earlier chapters and everything, Joseph was responsible for all of this, this 7 years of plenty, to provide for the world, basically everybody that came to Egypt for food. And of course there was a charge for this and everything, but Joseph was in charge of that. It wasn't just his family, but now his family is there, which through the providence of God, they came down for food as well, and so he's going to take care of his family because this is his family. And so he's approached the Pharaoh and he said, hey, because of the livestock they have and everything, can we put them up there in the land of Goshen where there would be plenty of grass and for their livestock? Because most of them were sheep herders.
For all we know, Esau's family might have been making this same trek, and here's Joseph possibly keeping all these people alive.
Yeah, could have been. All right, let's look at verses 12 and 13. Jensen, you want to read that for me, please?
45, 12, and 13. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here.
Okay, so in your handout on page 115, this would be capital letter I. As I have up here, Joseph's brothers were eyewitnesses that Joseph was alive and that he had risen to a high position in Egypt. So Joseph's words are so incredible that Jacob will need a credible witness now. Benjamin is the only brother whose character is beyond reproach and whose testimony is completely credible. Now the reason I say this, now remember, who is Benjamin's mother? Rachel. Who was Joseph's mother? Rachel. These are the two favored sons. And so Benjamin is going to have a lot of credibility with his dad. So Joseph no longer speaks through an interpreter now. You cannot but be convinced by the lineaments you see in his face, and by the language which I speak, and by all the things which I have related concerning the state of our family, that indeed it is your brother Joseph. Now remember, he doesn't look like Joseph because he was 17 when they sold him. He's dressed up in Egyptian dress. Egyptians were clean shaven, where many of the Jacob's family probably had beards. And so there was a difference in appearance here. And so he's got to make sure they understand that he is indeed Joseph. Or more simply, you have it not by hearsay, which might deceive you, but are eyewitnesses that I am alive, he's saying, and say these things to you. Jacob must be told these things so he can know that Joseph can do what he claims to be able to do. You see, Joseph's sending word back now, bring your family down here. So Jacob's got to be convinced that this can happen.
And that he's actually alive.
Yep. So Joseph says, bring my father down here. Jacob is going down to life then, not to death. Any comments through verse 12 or 13? All right, let's look at verses 14 and 15. Karen, you want to read that for me, please?
Okay.
Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that his brothers talked with him.
Okay? So as I have up there, true reconciliation between brothers is a beautiful thing. This is capital letter J and on page 115 of your handout. The family now is reconciled. These authentic gestures of emotion convince his brothers of his goodwill and finally free them from their stunned silence. Finally, they are comfortable enough with Joseph to talk with him as a brother. This doesn't mean they trust him. Because we're going to see that again in chapter 50. The rift, though, of silence that began before he was sold into slavery begins to be closed at this point. We're starting to maybe get to know each other once again. All right, any comments on verse 14 and 15? Look at verses 16 through 21. Isaac, we're back up to you.
Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brother has come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, Say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your household and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded to do this. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. Also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Then the son of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the command of the Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for their journey.
All right, so grand reunions are a pleasure even to those who are not part of the family. This is kind of interesting passages here in verses 16 through 21. Word quickly traveled to Pharaoh that Joseph's brothers had come and the family had made reconciliation. So Pharaoh, who had a lot of respect and regard for Joseph, you see that phrase, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well? This is the same terminology used of their reaction to Joseph's plan to preserve the kingdom. The intentional echo of Genesis 41, verse 37. Go back and look at that. Ron, you want to read that?
The advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants.
So this comment here in verse 37 of chapter 41 shows that the exceptional concessions made by the king to this Asiatic immigration are due to Pharaoh's high regard for Joseph. Having learned of the brothers' arrival, Pharaoh then invites the family to move to Egypt to live off the Egyptian bounty. You can almost picture that it was Pharaoh's decision, not Joseph going to Pharaoh asking if I can bring my family down, but it was Pharaoh saying, hey, bring your family down here to Egypt so you can take care of them. This invitation matches Joseph that it should be counted as God's providence at work. Pharaoh's offer not only matches, but it exceeds Joseph's. Because Pharaoh was prepared not only to provide them with a living place, but a better means of transporting the women and the children. Second, his invitation was not to Goshen, but it was to the best of the land and the fat of the land. Go back and look at verse 18 again. It says, bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. So Joseph's invitation spoke of the male members of the family back in verse 10, where it says, you shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. While Pharaoh explicitly included their little ones and their wives. Finally, they were they were told not to bring any of their possessions from home, because that would all be replaced with the best of what Egypt had to offer. What a change in life is taking place here. Joseph and Pharaoh's invitations were accepted then. Pharaoh's plan was followed, and the wheels were set in motion for Jacob and his family to relocate to Egypt. Things are coming together. But the brothers are still going to suspicion. All right, look at verses 22 through 24. Chris, you want to read that?
To all of them he gave each man change of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent after this manner 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way.
Verse 24 also.
So he sent his brethren away, and they departed. And he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way.
Okay. So, as I have up there, he gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. It was and it is customary with great men to bestow on their friends dresses of distinction. And in places where they are of the same description and quality, the value of these presents consists in their number. So it's no wonder that Benjamin got a little bit more. The great number given to Benjamin bespoke the warmth of his brother's attachment to him, and Joseph felt from the amiable temper they now all displayed that he might with perfect safety indulge this fond partiality for his mother's son. This was not a half brother, but this was a full brother. To his father he sent a supply of everything that could contribute to his support and comfort. The large and the liberal scale on which that supply was given, being intended as a token of his love for his father. Everything has turned out far better than could have ever been expected. What is there to quarrel over? Most likely, Joseph understands that now they have to tell their father what they had done.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Dad, we sold him. It does not take much imagination to all to hear what might be said at this point. It was Judah's idea to sell him. Reuben should have done a better job of making us not do anything bad. Why Reuben?
He's the oldest.
He was the oldest. You are the one who flagged down the traitors. Yes, John?
Actually, they don't have to tell him all that. All they have to do is say, we found him alive. He wasn't killed after all.
Yeah, but they're the
Leave
ones.
it at that.
They're the ones that brought the garment with blood on it to him and said he was killed.
They don't know how the garment got bloody.
Oh, okay.
They just tell him they found him alive. He is alive now. He'll be so happy. He won't ask questions about why. His favorite son's alive.
You keep telling yourself that, John.
They don't have to tell him all the details.
Joseph had tried to impress upon them that all of this was according to God's plan, but that likely would have been forgotten as they tried to get their story straight. You can imagine the 10 brothers here. Remember, Benjamin was still home with his father when they did this. So you got 10 brothers that now they've got to all 10 get together and get their story straight and decide who's going to tell the story. Okay?
Remember, one of them wasn't there.
That's what I say. Benjamin wasn't there.
No, the other one wasn't.
Well, Reuben wasn't there. Yeah, he came in.
There's
Yeah.
only 9 of them.
Yeah, 9 of them. Yeah, you're right. All right, look at verses 26 through 28 then. Stephanie, read that for me, please.
You don't want 25? Okay.
No.
All right. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Then Israel said, It is enough. Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.
Okay. This is capital letter N on page 115 of your handout. Some individuals are wise enough to be convinced by evidence. This reaction is really quite understandable when you think about it. After 20 long years, a declaration such as this would take some substantial evidence to corroborate. That statement, Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. Judah had warned that the loss of Benjamin would kill their father because he was the last son of Rachel. But now the shock over the news of Joseph's life, the adding back of the first son of Rachel, nearly does the same thing. They had plenty of evidence to back up their claim. All the words, that statement, all the words must include Joseph's speech on providence, which is used to gloss over the brothers' confession to their father of what they did, and recounting that what had been made, would have made for an interesting narrative, but is omitted as unnecessary to the story. So the wagons were additional evidence of the truth of what he had heard from his sons, and the consequence was that he was restored to fresh vigor. He seemed as if he had gained new life. And finally, the evidence is sufficient. Jacob believes that Joseph is alive, and he declares that they will go see him. Notice that last part there, however, that Joseph's words do not imply taking up permanent residence in Egypt, but seem to imply only a temporary visit at this point. Okay? So when we look at chapter 46 next week, the siege of the nation enter Egypt, and then we'll begin to see this more permanent relationship. Appreciate your participation tonight.
So God's providence was he survived a wild